I've got to say, I find today's Breaking at 8 pretty astounding. I find it astounding that the job fell to the United Firefighters Union to actually take the MFS to court to elicit action on this when, by any measure, and remember, I mean, you know, this is a government, a Labor government where we often have the SDA coming on the show talking about underpayment by fast food restaurants. You know, a government that is ostensibly Labor to its bootstraps. Well, one of its own departments has been found guilty of effectively stiffing our brave firefighting men and women out of hundreds of thousands of bucks worth of legitimate allowances, travel allowances, stretching back months. And it was only because of the union taking the MFS to court that they managed to get a result on behalf of their members. We've got the union secretary, Max Adlam, in the studio with us this morning to discuss this in detail. Max, thanks so much for coming in. Do you share my curiosity about why was it that the MFS didn't just immediately say, look, clearly there's been a stuff up, we're really sorry, we'll fix it right away?
Look, I think that from the MFS's perspective, there was an acknowledgement of the breach, no question about that. I think that it is about the resourcing of essential services in this state, and that's a matter that we have been raising with the government. The disappointing bit was, even though they put their hand up to the breach, there then was some sort of reluctance and inability to resolve it properly. So we're talking 8 months down the track, and the matter could have been resolved in mediation, but the government's representatives came along and refused to do that. They certainly balked at paying any interest, and in the end, of course, the orders require them to pay interest. So as the problem went on, it seemed like rather than accepting that there was an issue and applying resources properly to fix it, in the first instance, evidence was given that in last year they put 9 hours a week, and then in this year it went up to 12 hours a week, and it's still not fixed, and people are still getting wrong payments. And then they throw tens of thousands more in the court. Our estimation is it costs them at least $20,000 to oppose our application to the court for these orders to be made.
So for the firefighters who are affected, so in its totality, the estimate is that this is going to cost sort of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we're talking pretty significant money, because it's not a huge organisation, is it?
No, it's not, but it does rely on people using their own vehicles to be sent off to various stations. So that's a decision that the organisation makes. So they know well that people are travelling, where they're travelling to, the distances they're travelling, sometimes quite extensive distances. And they know that those allowances are due and payable. So you're right, it's puzzling, it's frustrating, but it's also anger-making when you see, you know, a barrister rolling up, a solicitor rolling up, a junior solicitor rolling up, two bureaucrats for several days in court for something they admit that they did, but they could have resolved it in mediation, but instead, for unknown reasons, decided to pursue it in the court. And, you know, the government came to office saying that they would bring legislation into this state mirroring, or saying it would be something like what's in the federal jurisdiction. So private enterprise employers get fairly heavy penalties for this sort of behaviour. But we've got a state government that's able just to go, oh, well, and we throw a bit more money at it, and, yep, now we've got some orders. It'll be interesting to see if they meet those orders.
You made a comment before that this goes to resourcing. That would seem to be a suggestion that this wasn't some sort of oversight or mistake, but a deliberate part of maybe cost-cutting by stealth. Is that the way you see it?
I have to think that that's involved. I think there's been some mistakes. But I also think that the problem's been we've got firefighters being used also as administrative people. So I understand that the two people doing it, one of them retired, one of them went on long sick leave. That was the evidence given in the court by the MFS executive director, and they didn't pick up that the work wasn't being done. Now, in part...
You can't not pay people because there's no one in the pay office.
No, no. And then the person who had the code, the person had the code to make the payment was on rec leave, so they had to bring them back in. I mean, it's been a bit ridiculous, but it's also been, there's a history now for the last 12 months, as I understand it, of support jobs just being cut. So we've got more and more firefighters taken off of operations to do some of the admin work at a higher level of pay, I have to suspect, and support workers' positions just disappearing.
Are you guys any closer to getting a resolution with the state government with regard to the suite of cancers that aren't covered in South Australia, that firefighters have an increased risk due to the exposure and the things that they do that are covered in other states? And I think of that broad topic with this regard to the specific case of South Australia's first female firefighter, who we know, we've been following the case very closely, is suffering with terminal pancreatic cancer at the moment. Any movement on that front?
Unfortunately, despite us having got the bill through the upper house last year with the help of Frank Pangello and all the parties supporting it, the ALP simply said they wouldn't oppose it, and they didn't, and it passed. And there's really been no further action on that. And I do feel there's a degree of frustration with us for raising it. But we have got members, and you're right, our very first woman firefighter, who's an amazing person, and she's been the first everything through the service. So the first commander as well, currently sadly in hospital. Hi, Adrian. She's allowed me to speak about her matter and is prepared when she's able to be speaking herself about suffering this awful disease. And it was only herself knowing that firefighters were liable to this, shown by the science, that her doctors actually discovered what she was suffering from. And sadly, it's an awful one. She's not the only member that we have who has that particular cancer. Another one is lung cancer, which a lot of people presume that firefighters would have had included right at the start. The science wasn't there when we were able to go ahead with that legislation. It's subsequently been available. It's now been provided to the government repeatedly, and so far, no, we don't have agreement on those cancers.
Between those cancers and this pay issue, has the relationship between our fireys and our state government ever been worse?
Oh, that's a hard one. It's pretty bad, I'll put it that way. We're still trying. Firefighters are incredibly consultative, very polite people. We're their union and we speak for them, so we take their instruction in the way that we go forward. So we have tried to engage. It's very difficult getting to see the people that make the decisions.
Bring back Paul Kiker.
Yeah, definitely. Well,
you would have had an in with him.
He's still around.
Yeah. He was the member for Colton.
He was.
And the former predecessor of yours in the role.
He was state and federal secretary of our union.
That's right.
And then Minister for Industrial Relations. Member for Colton, and one of the politicians who stayed true to what he was.
Well, it sounds like they need to, go back to their roots on this one.
It would be good if they did. Look, the emergency services sector overall is in dire straits at the moment, and a number of us have been trying to talk to the government about that. We hope they'll take it seriously, and by going public about it, we hope that will give them some impetus to talk to us and make some changes.
Well, it's a decent fight and one well worth having. Thanks for coming in, Max, and we'll stay in touch with you on the story. Max Adlam, the Secretary of the United Firefighters Union.